That's fancy. Okay. Anyway, so let's then start. So let me firstly give you some part of the, how do you say, I'm gonna tell you some stuff about what this workshop is not going to be about. So usually how people like to cover moral philosophy is going to like details of Kant, Hegel, all of the philosophers. I honestly don't think that does anything for you in debating. Usually people and debaters tend to overcomplicate making principled argumentation, and it is usually most hurtful towards the ESL speakers, like that I was a part of. And once I realized that principled argumentation can actually be quite simple, and actually should be quite simple and understandable, that's when I started to improve in principled argumentation. So as I said, I'm going to be pure, no bullshit, what you can use in debating, and not the theory that you can read online, watch a YouTube video or something like this. So this is going to be pure practice, and I think I hope you will like it, because that's what you should be here for. So another thing, what you can, can you go a little slower? Sorry, this is that's a problem with me, because I have it's like professional deformation. I taught myself how to speak faster, because again, as an ESL speaker, you have to speak fast if you want to compete with people who speak better and also faster than you. So I am definitely going to slow down. Thank you for reminding me of this. This is necessary, because as I said, this is a professional deformation of mine. Please don't fault me for it. So if at any time I speed up again and I am not audible or something, please just let me know in the chat. Chat is right in front of me, so I'm looking at pretty much everything that you're writing. Also, if at any point you have a question, that is completely fine. Just stop me and write a message, and you will be able to. I will try to answer it to the best of my abilities. At the midpoint section of the lecture, I might take like a 2-minute break to rest my voice, because I've been doing lectures from 8 a.m. in the morning, because I'm coaching now kids from China. So yeah, just don't fault me for that as well. So I will get into the lecture now with all of these disclaimers. Going now. So we are talking about moral philosophy or principled argumentation in topics that people fear the most, usually in debating. So the first thing from the get-go that I need to cover is that I think principled argumentation is not really a correct terminology per se, right? Because usually when people say principles, usually people mean non-consequentialism, or they mean deontological principles. They usually, they usually assume that as a principle, and when they say practical points, they usually mean stuff like utilitarianism. The problem is, both of these are principles. Principle and moral philosophy and utilitarianism is part of moral philosophy per se. So it's not like you're comparing stuff that is non-comparable, and it's very important to note, especially for judging. I will have, I think it will be posted today, my video about this particular topic about judging it, as well on our Korea judge training module. But what I'm covering there basically is that every argument has its own underlying principle, pretty much, right? In most situations, teams will agree that we should care about who brings most utility, who brings most benefit, happiness, less poor people, or less people dying and stuff like that. But still, underneath it all is the moral framework of utilitarianism. Is that what we should care about is utilitarianism. And what is the problem in some of the circuits and in some of the judges is that people find it, it's quite natural. People find it easier and more intuitive to buy this, utilitarian points. And this is why usually people are more dismissive of the principle point. But that doesn't mean that there aren't ways for you to combat even bad judges who are not willing to buy these things. So this is some tips for you to give here. But as I said, the first important thing to notice is to know, even when you're delivering a principled deontological framework, is that every argument has a framework, and if usually people are operating under the utilitarian framework. This is important for battle against of the framework. So usually two main school of philosophies that are battling, obviously there are millions of them, and this is a super complex topic, but as I said, I'm not going to go into it. This is pure no bullshit practice in this situation. It's basically some form of non-consequentialist argumentation or deontological argumentation versus utilitarian argumentation. So that's usually mostly the clash. What is saying, what these school of thoughts are saying is basically non-consequentialism would be saying, or like deontological principles would be saying, that some actions are moral or immoral regardless of the consequences of the happen. So for example, murder would be immoral even if it would be done to save a certain person. So there is no exception of the rule. Maybe some other principle can save it, like for example, principle of self-defense would trump this, and there's different moral frameworks for different actions, but they would say that some actions are immoral even if they would lead to better outcomes and betterment of society in a certain situation. Like as I said, like torture would be immoral, even if it would lead you to save some lives by preventing, for example, terrorist attack or something like this. We consider this immoral and inhumane. Similar to some people view death penalty, right, in this sort of situation. Like even though like some teams might present an argument that says this might decrease crime, even though that's questionable. Like I'm not gonna go into it. You can like a very like non-consequentialist principle would be this is an inhumane way of treating human beings and hence immoral. So even if there's, how do you say, better consequences, we shouldn't do it. Sometimes utilitarianism and deontological principles overlap. Sometimes both of these frameworks would be there and tell you that the action is moral. Like it's not like every time in every situation they would disagree. But that tells you where the burden of your non-consequentialist and deontological case will lie. And it will most likely lie in where they're not cooperating. So for example, you will never get to claim, like in the situations where you're talking about, how do you say, where you're talking about your non-consequentialist principle, you will never get to claim good consequences when it's done right. You are getting to claim, and your burden of proof that you need to in order to win this clash and this debate is to prove to me that even if the situation will get worse, and even if we have horrible harms, we would still uphold this moral principle. And that's sometimes lost on people in this sort of situation. And that's sometimes what people don't realize when they're making their principle argumentation. This is that in pure form, non-consequentialist argumentation is devoided of the consequences completely. Which means that sometimes when people are making principle argumentation and they're then sad that it's not taking into account, is in form of maybe saying we have a duty or obligation, for example, to help a disenfranchised community, to help an African American community, to help women, or like we have some duty. Like usually people call that principle there. The issue with this is that this is not really a true non-consequentialist principle, right? Because it's still contingent on you proving that this policy is actually helping, and that's the point. And this is the part that they're missing. Like this is the next link, and it's actually a contingent principle. This is not useless because like this is a good setup for your argument that is going to prove that this helps this community becoming the most important. But on its own, when doing it, and I see this is a lot of people making this mistake, on its own, it's not winning you the debate, even though it might seem to you. Even if you prove it by 100%, it's still a contingent principle. And for example, me from opposition to that, I can concede your principle and be like, yes, we agree 100% that we have the obligation to help these people, or we have the obligation to give people the right to vote or something like this. But here is why this particular policy is actually not helping the people, or is actually actively hurtful or harmful. So this means that I can win with conceding the full thing that you say and debating under your moral framework in this sort of situation. So that is something to always pay attention to. What your principle that you're trying to, what is the thing that you're trying to prove actually doing? Is it establishing this moral framework? Is it establishing what we should care about mostly in the debate, which is usually this moral obligation point? We have moral obligation to help a certain community, is establishing a thing. But it's not necessarily non-consequentialist principle that is completely devoided of you proving that this actually helps these people. And sometimes it will be obvious that it helps these people, but it still needs some layer of explanation in order for that principle to be bought. And that is the common mistake that I see in teams make. Okay, so let's talk about this moral framework. So as I said, usually judges, and especially like this is like let's get one thing straight before. Good judge should never take one of the moral frameworks a priori better. Like you're like by rules of judging, you're an average reasonable person who has no opinions, right? So you should be able to be persuaded by both principle and practical argumentation. So both deontological and non-consequentialist argumentation and utilitarianism, right? But in real life, in reality, that's not always going to happen. And I also received struggles with some judges being tougher to buy some principles. So the next part is also going to make you ready to deal with these people as well in this sort of situation. So let me talk about that. Let me talk about that now. So what you need to do is to establish that the if the judge is starting sorry, you have a question. You can write, yeah. Well, so look, I'm getting to it now. I'm not necessarily immediately going to address your question because this is the part when I'm talking now, and like I'm going to talk about the reverse, right? Is that fine? Like, but I'm definitely this is the thing that I will be talking about in the next section of the lecture, if that's fine. Okay, that is actually what I'm going with. So, basically, you have, if everybody's agreeing on the metric of the debate being utilitarianism, then debates plays as normal, nothing needs to be done, and that's fine. And that's how most debates play out, right? But in principled argumentation, and if you're taking upon yourself a burden to do a principled argumentation, and other teams are taking this utilitarian stances, you need to establish why the debate should be judged by the metric of your choosing, which is non-consequentialism in this sort of situation, right? That you're trying to present. So you are trying to prove to a judge why utility is not the only thing that should be considered, especially because they have some preconditions. So a couple of things to raise that can help you in that area. One is that I don't think any like in status quo, like in real life, like that we're living now, nobody is taking either of the utilitarianism or non-consequentialism to its extreme, right? Like in real life, some areas of our life are like led by the facts of non-consequentialism. Some are led by utilitarianism. For example, if we are constructing a criminal justice system where we have things like right to not self-incriminate, beyond all reasonable doubt, like principle, like prohibiting searching without a warrant. Oh, sorry, just 1 second. I need to close the window. It started to smell really bad. So in these sort of areas, you would probably have some sort of non-consequentialism framework, right? Like if we were to decrease the standard of incarceration. So, for example, it's not anymore beyond all reasonable doubt, but it will be balance of probabilities. We will probably have more people in jail who are guilty, so less people walking free who are guilty. But we are willing to take the hit, and maybe that would reduce crime or whatever. But we are willing for the principle of innocent people not going to jail accidentally. We are definitely willing to make, some sacrifices there and to uphold this non-consequentialist principle in this sort of situation. Similar to other walks of life that we are doing. We have different principles of choices that we're giving. Maybe even democracies that we're living in might be better, if we had a different system or something like this. But we are sacrificing it for some non-consequentialist principle, which is not based on consequences, but is based on some facts like justice, fairness, and stuff like that, right? Similarly, some other cases we use utilitarianism. For example, if you have a natural disaster and people are like you need to decide where the resources go, usually you're deciding based on the need, you're deciding based on what maximizes happiness, you're sometimes willing to sacrifice some privacy and some of these principles because you believe utility at that time is the most important. So this is what needs to happen. Like debating sometimes tends to go into this circle jerk mode of thinking, and that's what I hate, but that is so mutually exclusive that like it's only utility or it's only non-deontological principles. But like this is what makes it easy. If you are realistic and if you're showing to another team, and that's one of the things, like showing to the other team. This, by the way, this particularly has to deal with breaking the utilitarian bubble, because like utilitarianism will be assumed in most of the debates. People will not even try to defend it. They will just assume that it's most important. And sometimes even the judges will buy it on face value, which is, if you want to avoid that, the best way to do it is to illustrate to a judge where in their own life they're already not believing in utilitarianism. So it's making them like snap out of their utilitarian bias to some extent, right? Which is to say, as I said, like by showing some of these facts. For example, as I said, like we do not preemptively incarcerate people. So there are some groups of people that are at high risk of crime, but we don't imprison people preemptively just because we believe that we will prevent some crime, because we think that's immoral. Secondly, we don't allow torture. Thirdly, we have beyond all reasonable doubt. Fourthly, we have so many principles. Just by reminding a judge of some of these principles in real life that we are using, where we are not using utilitarian metric, might make them, usually makes them snap out of the utilitarian bubble and be like, yeah, we are not using utilitarianism in every circumstance, which makes you much more likelier for them to then buy your framework in this sort of situation. This doesn't mean that you are devoided from the responsibility of then explaining why your case should fall under this non-consequentialism, but it makes it much easier for them to move on, because now that's the best way I found of bursting this utilitarian bubble that people are having in this sort of situation. So another thing, okay, and that's it. The way that you're engaging. So now let's talk about this moral principle framework and stuff like that. In good debates, teams will be battling on two levels. One is to prove their argument, but the more important battle, if you're talking about consequentialism and non-consequentialism, will be happening on the level of, how do you say, battling for framework, for moral framework. Battling to see which moral framework should we take into account in this instance. So this addresses the question that you had to some extent. I will start, and the ways to do it is twofold. Like I think I found two good mechanisms to approach it, and they can both work for utilitarianism breaking and deontological principles breaking to some extent. You are trying to increase the burden of the other side. So what is usually important when somebody is having a huge important principle in this sort of situation is to try to make them look morally inconsistent, because they're not taking a stance on a similar issue in a similar situation. This can be done by both sides of the house. And usually, if you are morally inconsistent, you are giving away the persuasiveness of the thing. So by increasing the burden, and by trying to do so by the techniques that I will tell you now, you are much more likely, how do you say, to put the opposition team in a very unfavorable spot. So what is that? So you need to assess what their logic is saying and see where that logic would apply, and hence apply that logic there and force them to take it. The best way for me to explain this that is not theoretical, and because I don't have a table behind me so I can write it, is to explain you on the how do you say example that I have. So that was the 7th round of Callan EUDC. It had to deal with Western medical institutions or something, like I think Western medical institutions, cutting their cooperation with other medical institutions that are not following their standards, their ethical standards in experimentation. So if somebody is not following ethical standards in experimentation on drugs and stuff like that, Western institutions should cut their ties away from it. I was opening government. I think some EPL team was opening opposition. What opening opposition was trying to say in their case was pretty much, and I was having a non-consequentialist principle, which was like it's immoral to aid and abet in stuff that is like non-ethical because like it hurts people. It's horrible for people to not able to how do you say, have a freedom of choice. Like usually not unethical trials are based on hiding some evidence from people, not telling them not telling them there's some side effects to the drug, or sometimes even basically trying to what is this? Somebody turned on the video. So what did I want to okay, so that is the motion. That is the motion that I want to say. So opposition, what they wanted to prove to me is that this research will lead us to find more drugs, and that more lives will be saved by more drugs being found. Okay, and that sounds like a very powerful point. In a vacuum, they are trying to prove to me that there will be more lives saved by their policy and by us cooperating with it. But the way for me to burst that was to, first of all, ask them and put the burden on them and say, if your principle and if you think the most important thing that we should do is find drugs as fast as possible and like save the most lives, then would you also lift these ethical restrictions whatsoever from the entirety of the world? What they're forced to do in this situation is bad on both sides. They're forced to pick between two bad options. One option is to accept and say, yes, we will lift ethical standards everywhere. This is significantly harder for them to prove than the first thing, right? So this means that I'm already in a better position to prove my point in a certain situation. And secondly, if not, they are forced to accept that their utilitarian principle is not as important or should not be the sole criteria upon which we judge whether we should do something or not, right? So on both situations, whatever they answer, it's going to be bad for them, and I'm going to adjust according to this. So this is how you're trying to increase their burden in this sort of situation. There's multiple things in this, for example, debate that can lead us to save lives, but we are not doing it because it's not only, we are not living in a world that is only there about saving lives. We're also caring about human dignity. We are also caring about, how people feel about consequences on their lives. And this is definitely going to be horrible. Like, and obviously, then afterwards, I had the analysis that I'm not going to go to about my case. But that's the best way to illustrate what I'm meaning in this sort of situation. You're trying to test their logic. And usually the teams will not be as diligent with their logic. They will be pretty lazy and sometimes even simplistic. Because, as I said, they're not doing a specificity logic, which is saying, here's a specific thing, why specifically in these countries this is okay and it's not okay for everybody. No, they're doing a broad principle of let's save lives. And then you get them. And then you get them because they just now conceded that they're not as important as they should be. What they answer in the end to me, and this is also leading me to a second point of what you can do, is, but we're saving a lot of lives in this sort of situation. That's a non-answer. Like, obviously they're lost, but that is leading you to a very good additional response to it. Moral principles to some extent. And as I said, remember, their principle, even though they haven't said it out loud, they never said the word utilitarianism. Their principle is utilitarianism, even though they haven't said it. That's like, you need to understand that. So you're trying to attack them on this. So what they're trying to tell me, what they're trying to say, is that the quantity of lives is what influences that this is okay or not. And what my answer to that is, and what this is something, is that it's an arbitrary, the numbers are very much an arbitrary factors. What does it mean, large amount of people? That means that pretty much there will have to be a cutoff at some point upon which they will be okay or not okay with doing it. And that's very, like if you do it to a very absurd point, it's stupid. Like if they say, would it be okay for 1,000 people? If they say yes. but then would it be okay for 999 people? And like at some point they will have to make a cutoff where they would say, yes, this is not okay. This is not morally justified. It's super arbitrary. Like you can't really, how do you say, you can't really debate and defend your principle like this, right? And that's the point, and that's how you are trying to basically force them to take a stance that even in situations where it doesn't save as many lives as they want to say to you, they still would be, in order to be consistent with their principle, they would still need to defend the same thing, right? So that's how basically, like even like the famous trolley problem that you probably know, which I usually start these lectures by, but I can't do it here because like you're not in front of me, we're not raising hands and doing stuff like that. But like shortly, like if you are driving a trolley and there is 5 people ahead of you that you will crash into, you have only option is to go to another track where there is 1 person that you kill. And as I said, like the ontological principle will probably be just stick with where you are. And utilitarianism would always answer to move and to kill less people. Utilitarianism, like 1 versus 5 is an arbitrary number. If you are a utilitarian, it shouldn't matter if it's 1, 5,000, or 2 people that are compared, right? And that's the point. That's what you're trying to do with this sort of situation. If your principle is correct, and if your principle of utility is we should do what is maximizing utility, even 2 people saved in your life for 1 life sacrifice is still on net probably a better utility in your world. So a famous debate that can be not broken, but can be very much skewed. Sorry, I need to drink, sip some water. Just give me a sec. Cool. So a good way to how to say the debate is basically I think it was Cambridge IB quarterfinals, and it was I'm not sure if you all know, so I'm going to explain the principle first. So the principle of beyond all reasonable doubt is usually said in a sentence that says it's better to have 100 guilty men walk free than 1 innocent person in jail. So that's usually how it's illustrated in this sort of situation. And the debate that was set was basically something like, actually, this house would rather have 100 guilty men in jail, and also even though 1 innocent person is going to go to jail and stuff like that. The problem with this debate is a lot of teams that I looked at were focusing on this, but these 100 people, what are they going to do? They're going to do a lot of how do you say harm. This is like you're going to let 100 people with like all of the crimes that they can do. The problem is if their principle is correct, and if this is what they're defending, they should not care if it's 100, 99, 5, 10, or 2, which again increases their burden, because in the eyes of the judge, it shouldn't make a difference, but it is quite different if their burden is 100 people or 2 people, right? And that's what you can do. That's what you can point this arbitrariness, like the arbitrariness of this sort of situation. They need to then provide you a clear cutoff of when their principle is standing and when their principle is stopping, and why in this sort of situation. For example, there is a famous analogy with like helping a drowning baby, right? Which like usually again it's interactive, but again it's not a setting, not necessarily a good setting to do it. Which says, like if you see a drowning baby, like in like a very shallow water next to your feet, do you have moral obligation to pick it up? And usually all people say yes. If it's 1 meter away, usually people say yes. If it's 2 meters away, people say yes. If it's 100 meters away, and it shows to you that it's very arbitrary. And like at some point, maybe if it's like 3 kilometers away, 4 kilometers away, you can start constructing some principle why it would be okay, for example, that would endanger your own life or something like this. But up until that point, whatever number they pick is arbitrary, and they cannot do it, and you can point out and call them out on it in this sort of situation. A lot of the examples that I gave was mostly about utilitarianism and like bursting the utilitarianism, because that's the most common thing that you will encounter, right? Like the most common thing that you will have to battle is people arrogantly claiming that utilitarianism is the only and sole thing that should be considered. But there is a there is a question as well that I received, especially like these very powerful principles in this sort of situation, in the essence of morality. The problem is that can also be challenged. It was just not sufficiently challenged by the other side. It was not. So to be honest, like Bo's speech in that finals is maybe the most famous, but it is still, if you're adjudicating the debate, it's not that far. Closing opposition is not that far. I think closing opposition even has a split for it. It was like 6-1 split in the end, which I disagree. I think opening government definitely wins. But there's stuff that you can do. And this mostly has to deal with either the way that they prove their argument. So you can either take down their argument, or you can take down that moral framework in this sort of situation. Which is to say that usually their burden, what their burden is that even if this fails, it's justified. And this is the most powerful line, which is like, even if we're doomed to fail, self-defense is justified in the face of evil. In the face of evil in this sort of situation. The problem is, if your self-defense, and that's maybe how I would approach maybe addressing, if your self-defense also endangers thousands of other people who possibly didn't want to participate, that now do not have a choice or are harmed by this, this is also not okay, because you're also removing choice from some of these people. And obviously I would try to mitigate that you don't have any other alternative to do so. But like you're trying to present and burst, couple of things in their speech, which is, as I said, that their burden is to prove that even if a lot of innocent people die, it is still okay because it's a principle of self-defense. And you're trying to explain, and obviously you still have to explain why endangering some of these people if this revolution fails and something is not justified and is actually leading people who would not consent, who did not consent into something bad. So you can also say, like, some things might be, like I have a choice. I have a choice to make if I want to change something, if I want to join the revolution or not. But usually revolutions are not done by everybody in society. Like even like whatever revolution you see, it's done by a smaller percent of people who are willing to risk their lives in this sort of situation. But if you know that the chance of success is small, and then you prove that obviously in opposition case, but you are still going for it, and you know that when you fail, you are going to endanger and make lives worse for people who did not consent, who are also oppressed like you, and who are also in bad position as you. This is immoral and this is bad. For example, there is a very good, like they use World War II. They use World War II as an analogy. I would use a World War II analogy against them in this sort of situation. They say like when Warsaw uprising was falling down, Germans were around them. They could fight, give it their all, or give up and throw their weapons. Sure, that sounds fancy. But similarly, that's similar to when, for example, Nazis were in the Balkans. Like we had, like they conquered. We had partisans, like they were communists. They were trying to do. Sometimes they were trying to they were trying to sabotage. They were trying to sabotage, for example, some German operations or stealing from German operations. That sometimes was not even effective. Was not doing anything. But people who suffered the punishment for it was the citizens who had no consent about it. So usually Germans did stuff like if you kill one of ours, we will kill 100 of yours in this sort of situation. So sometimes the entire villages were wiped out because some of these people were reckless. And we say that usually the people who would be suffering from this and stuff like that are even more disenfranchised than people who would be taking up arms and doing this revolution. So in that sort of situations, you're trying to combat them on different metrics and different levels and trying to increase their burden to some extent. And obviously some of the things that I delved now into is also to deal with how they developed their argument, because like everything that they developed also needs a proper response. And one of the reasons why closing opposition loses the debate to some extent is because they're not answering to all of them. Especially, for example, self-defense analogy. Like self-defense analogy is left standing after the whole debate, and it can be tackled. It can be said like this is clearly not the same situation as self-defense. It's not direct. Here is 3 principles of self-defense, and then maybe come up with something, because like self-defense needs to be proportional, needs to be immediate, it needs to, like your life needs to be immediately in danger in this sort of situation, or something like this. Here is why this doesn't fall under this criteria, or just partially falls under this criteria. Here is why then this means this analogy doesn't stand, right? So you still needed to answer some of these points, and this is the way to combat these points when you still want to fight for utility. And that's the problem. But obviously, if they do like an excellent job in some of these debates, those were some of the best speeches around. Like I still, for example, think that their principle, and if you want to look at the good principle, like from quarter final, like they Bo from test finals gets all of the memes from the finals. But I actually think that his speech in quarterfinals about black secessionist state in the United States of America is even better. Like it's so good. Like it's so beautiful and does everything that I'm going to speak to you in 1 second about. So that one is definitely looking more in detail into, even though it's not getting as much attention. And I think it's not getting as much attention because it's like not a final setting in this sort of situation. But like definitely an excellent speech to look at. So sometimes, as I said, like if they do this better than you, you will lose, because that's how debating works. But like you can still how do you say, respond, and you can still, how do you say, put up a fight. And the way to put up a fight is to firstly, as I said, increase their burden and show that usually the burden on non-consequentialist argument is, that's why people don't usually do them. It's because like it's very hard for you to prove that we should really sacrifice all of these people so we can potentially establish some of the principles of how do you say, especially Marxist revolution, for instance, in this situation. So it's hard for people to prove, and it's very like if that motion, like, and that's like, if that motion wasn't the final and they weren't there, if there was like an in round, most likely most rooms would be ops weeks. And that's the problem. Like, but there was a moment of brilliance that was there in this sort of situation. But like as I said, like if you manage, if they manage to prove to this, similar way as you're trying to increase the burden on utilitarianism of having to defend utilitarianism in most circumstances, in all circumstances, similar to how you also can increase the burden on deontological principles and non-consequentialist principles by showing all of the examples and all the sacrifices that they have to make for it, and then called it not worth it. Especially because, as I said, all of the deontological principles that we have in the status quo go up to a point. And that's also an important, by the way, thing to notice. It's not like every, like beyond all reasonable doubt, as a principle in criminal justice, still has some innocent people going to jail. If we wanted to have 0% innocent people going to jail, we might want to increase the burden even more, right, in this sort of situation. But we're not doing it because at some point, the costs are just too high, and we're willing to sacrifice them to some extent. So that's where you need to push them, right? Like every principle that they're standing for is also to some extent like as I said, like murder. Usually the way that utilitarians like to bicker with non-consequentialists is like if murder is wrong, but imagine you are holding a gun onto a person that is holding how do you say, his finger on the button to start a World War III. Would that also be immoral? Because like that's the extreme situation. Because like if murder is immoral, that murder is also immoral. But like you're literally saving the planet and saving people. So in that sort of situation, obviously you're not going as far as what I just said. Like that might be the most extreme example. But you're trying to find something that they will be more uncomfortable with. And in the best debates about principles, usually each side will try to do this for another team. And it will be a quite fun intellectual game in this sort of situation. And it doesn't, yeah. So that's that for that part of the lecture. I think, yeah, I mean, I think continue on it, but I do have other stuff that I want to cover in terms of how to make the arguments itself. so far in this, what I told you so far is basically not how to prove these arguments, but how to prove and establish a moral framework that this judge should be debated by. And you should always do this, because like if you're not doing this and you're not establishing a moral framework, you're leaving yourself vulnerable to a judge who will not buy that non-consequentialism is important in some situations. Sometimes maybe they are even right, but like if you establish a moral framework and if you prove the moral framework, then certainly by the rules of judging, like if you win that clash, and if you prove then your principal point, they will have to vote for you. They cannot vote for utilitarianism just because they have their own impact. And also, as I said, be mindful that even though it's an incorrect way of judging to assume utilitarianism is the default, a lot of people think that. And just to be risk averse, every time I'm delivering principles, I'm trying to explain it as I am trying to, how do you say, as they are they're not buying my case at all. I'm trying to get it closer to them. So majority of judges are judging based on moral intuitions, right? So there is no, like basically, none of us, like not none of us, I want to say none of us, but like most of us didn't study philosophy. Most of us didn't study ethics. Judges didn't study ethics. They have no idea. They have some feelings and some moral preconditions that they're feeling. They have some things that sound iffy to them and some things that sound like plausible to them to some extent. And you are trying to, like, if your case is, how they say, more on the side that the judge cannot sympathize immediately, you then need to do a much, how they say, greater job to translate it into, how they say, something that will break this moral intuition from another team. And that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to basically make some of your points sound intuitive. And that's where all of these things, like I think, to be honest, I think EPL people give principles a bad name, because like every time I hear an EPL person, every time, it's not every time, but most of the times when I hear EPL teams, especially mediocre EPL teams, delivering that against an ESL team, they're usually trying to confuse everybody with super fancy words, with like all of these, how do you say, all of these fancy bringing up of Kant, bringing up of some as you say, confusion and fanciness. That's not how to deliver a principle. That's also like ignorant to some extent. And some judges do tend to buy it. And you need to be, how do you say, ready to how to say, to have your bullshit radar and say like, they haven't proven anything. Like principles don't have to sound smart. They just have to sound logical. And that's what I'm going in with the next part of this lecture, which is how are you proving a certain principle. By the way, before this, did I answer your question? Is this satisfactory to your to your thing? Like I just became mindful of that. I'm gonna wait until you type. Yeah, no worries. I'm sorry. I just forgot that I also need to ask you if you understood. So, okay. So let's then talk about how to prove a principle and what to do. And this is what people struggle with the most, because they don't realize that they try to overcomplicate simple things, which is logic. As I said, you don't have to have any knowledge of any, how do you say, philosophical books to derive some of the logic from it. The principal argumentation is usually made through two ways of structure. One is like these principal mechanisms, and two is analogies. Those two will be your most powerful tools in it. Let's talk about principal mechanisms. So this is basically, you're trying to see where is your principle deriving from. What is the thing that you're trying to do? But sorry, one thing before that, you are trying to see what is the thing that you care about the most as a principle, right? And it can be a platitude of different things, but it needs to be very clear. And this is what sometimes teams don't do. It's not necessarily clear what do you want to do with this principle. Where is this principle derived from? So sometimes, like some of the examples that you can do. For example, it can be consent. Consent is like the moral framework is derived from people's ability to consent. Or it can be moral principles should be derived from principle of justice, like and fairness, and people receiving certain, how do you say, certain justice. So in this sort of situation, or like you can also talk about like what are we, like a principle of like dignity and right to pursue happiness. So some of these things. All of these things have some place that they're deriving from. Like if you were to ask a 17, 16, or like earlier philosophers, they might tell you that this is deriving from God and stuff like that. Usually that's not good to bring up in the debate, even though that's fine. But where does this derive from? Usually it derives from some things that you either didn't have under your control, or like principles like veil of ignorance. So let me explain some of these things that usually start off the principles. Like 90% of the principles that people do usually starting from somewhere around here, which is usually either the principle of lottery of birth, which basically means that you haven't chose where you are born, in what situations, what is your societal status and stuff like that. And so basically your life became on a fundamental act of not choosing. So you can basically connect it, and if you do maybe a simple logic, you should obviously do a bit more. Is basically because your life has started with a fundamental act of non-choosing, and you're dealing with suffering and suffering because of that non-choosing, we as a society should strive to maximize your ability to choose from now onward in this sort of situation. So that can also lead you good to a principle of consent and the principle of whatever policy that you try to do, and why some policy is either maximizing people's ability to choose, why this policy is minimizing somebody's ability to choose, so we are taking it away in this sort of situation. But you're starting from some of these, from one of these, for example, things. Also, it can be principle of justice, right? What do you deserve as a person? And it can be proven by all of the different things. It can, and it doesn't have to be like, it can be justice in terms of like, if somebody, like very simple logic of like reparation. Somebody did something wrong to you, it needs to, repay what they did to you. So basically, they need to receive some sort of reparation for a thing that they did to you. So that's what this principle is going to be based on. This is not just a mechanism that is going to be used about reparations per se, giving money, but a lot of things that we owe to people is going to be based on us wronging them, and we need to right the wrong to some regard in this sort of situation. And this is basically, as I said, connected to like some very like easy and simple moral intuition that most of the people accept. Like, if I steal something from you, I should be returning that. Like, we think that's fair. If you want to go more philosophical, there's like Rawls's principle of justice, which is like behind the veil of ignorance, and it's also completely fine. Also, if you can explain it to some extent, which means that let me explain what it is. Like, behind the veil of ignorance means that if you were to be completely, I'm going to simplify it, obviously. Like, if you study philosophy, don't hate me. I don't care about studying philosophy. I care about you winning the debate. So I'm simplifying it just as a debate knowledge. So if you were to depersonalize yourself or remove yourself from who you are in this sort of situation, so I'm not Milos, and were to choose a certain outcome or a certain way of the world that is going to look like. So it's basically trying to make you see that what would you consider to be a fair world if you did not know where you would end up in this world, in this sort of situation. So the usual analogy is with the cake, in terms of like, if you don't know which slice you're going to get of the cake, how would you cut the cake? And like, his answer is probably you should cut it most equally, because you want to minimize the chance of you not getting nothing. You would definitely not cut the cake completely, one person getting 100%, which is usually like a good analogy towards what we have now, like 1% of the richest owning 99% of the wealth and stuff like that. But like that's the principle, and principle stands like that. Any of us, it will be immoral, and it's kind of like even a biblical principle to some extent. Don't do unto others what you wouldn't do for yourself, right? Don't accept the moral situation that you have in the status quo just because you're well off in this situation. if you wouldn't accept it if you were in another position. So that would be immoral. And that's how you can define justice. Like nobody would want, and for example, in a earlier example that I illustrated about medical institutions in ethical trials, this is one of the reasons that I gave, which was like, look, like none of us would want to be the person who would be experimented against for the savior of humanity in this sort of situation. None of us would want and be willing to accept the outcome where we can be the ones drawn being in such a horrible pain. Why are we accepting it being done to other people when it's not us in this sort of situation, and when it's happening far away in a country that is probably poorer than ours and is something else? This is sometimes a very powerful way to connect your logic and to connect with the judge as well. Because again, I told you, you're not, and this is what debaters need to realize. This is a mini digression rant. World is not about the best judges. The people always complain about bad judges. I'm the first one who will complain about bad judging at Worlds or something like this. But basically, debating is about overcoming bad judges. Because in a real life situation where after all of this is done and after you're working, you will not ever in your life be dealing with good BP judges who study this and doing stuff like that. So the most applicable skill that you can learn from debating is actually learning to deal and learning to be approachable to people who have no idea how to judge, right? So that's your attitude. That's how your attitude should be. Obviously, we should be working on improving the judging quality. I am doing it for Korea and Belgrade for some of the programs. I think that's very important. But still, the lessons that you should take away from bad calls is, how could I have convinced this person that misinterprets and has some wrong idea about debating, about why am I correct or why am I? There is always probably something that you could have done in this situation. So that's why a lot of the times I am how to say telling you these things. And as I said, this is a good way to connect to some of these judges, especially to connect to their moral intuition and for them to how to say understand why your principle is important. This is especially important because we all come from different cultures. We all come from different countries and different circles. Like most of you, how do you say it again? Most of you don't know, I don't know, a lot of Serbs and stuff like that, or how I grew up. But we all have different experiences of how we grew up in this sort of situation. The problem is, if you're not trying to bridge this gap of experience between the judge and yourself, this is where most of the misunderstanding and most of the people not buying your case comes from in this sort of situation. And it is a skill that you need to be practicing in terms of how are you connecting similar experiences. And the good way to do it is try to appealing to some of these moral primal intuition that we believe, which is to say it is unfair to impose onto somebody something that you would not do onto yourself. So this is a very clear mechanism, and if you're presenting it in that way, obviously not in this one sentence, but explaining it in a logical chain, this is the way for you to connect your principle actually and to prove it completely. So that's what I'm insinuating in this sort of situation. And yeah, so that is super important. That is super important to do. Just find, and again, I give you some of the examples. I can obviously not give you all of the ways to prove principal points, because there is infinite amount of them, as there is infinite amount of argumentation, but it needs to be like this. The important and crucial thing that people don't do is when they learn to do principles, usually it's easy to do this step. It's easy to start to incorporate lottery of birth, principle of reparation, principle of justice. There is one more, by the way, that I forgot. I'm going to tell you now, which is what government, because a lot of debates have to do with what governments are owing you or not owing you in this sort of situation, moral obligation of the government towards you in this sort of situation. Usually, mantra that I hear from every debater is that government owes you particular and special duty to you as a citizen rather than to any other citizen, is because you are the one paying taxes, which is giving up your money for the protection of the state. Second, there's three things there. Second, you're abiding by the laws, so you're sacrificing some of the freedoms that you can, maybe I want to, for example, do drugs or something like this, but my government is not allowing me to do so or something. So I have to abide by what society has said, and I have to be limited and limit my freedom and give up my freedom for it. And thirdly, and maybe even most importantly, even though it sounds like it's not applicable, it's like if the state is in danger, state still reserves the right, and I will be called upon to defend this state. So if the state is attacked in the act of war in the last resort, or if there is a huge natural disaster, the state will definitely use me and use my, like even sacrifice my life for the benefit of the state. Because of these reasons, state owes me a special right that it doesn't owe to other people. That, by the way, this is coming, like this analysis is most famously done and most famously copied from Sheng Wu Li's speech in EUDC 2009, a debate about opening up all immigration. It was like lift all restriction on immigration. He had a principal case from opening opposition that did this. If you want a good practical principal cases, I suggest watching like almost every other Sheng Wu speech has some very good principles, some very good principled argumentation that yes, indeed. This 2009 finals. He is leader of the opposition. Obviously, there's other good teams that are there. Famously, that finals is 3 Oxford teams and 1 Tel Aviv team, which is there's a quite funny joke from Yoni in that speech. But yeah, I spoiled it. Opening opposition wins, and leader of the opposition in particular, how he proves it and how he proves obligation, that you have definitely more obligation towards your own citizens rather than to any immigrant, is very powerful and very good thing. It's obviously this analysis is applicable to other stuff, but like for example, when you're trying to prove a principle that democracy being important and stuff like that. But as I said, like this is practically a mantra at this point that a lot of people are just telling, like every time you will need to prove government obligation towards specifically as citizens in comparison to other people, usually people are saying these things. So that's useful for you to probably note down and remember. So all of these things are connecting what you're trying to say and your burden of the motion towards the how do you say, towards proving that point. But there is still a thing that people sometimes also miss, which is so you should think of it this way. Your burden is then, one, to pick one of these mechanisms, let's say whichever one you want, and analyze it, and try to connect the dots between A and B, with A dot being one of your chosen principles, and B dot being the burden of the motion. And that's the thing. And that's the thing that's usually missing. Because, like, for example, like I even recently saw it for our module. Like, it was like debate about technocracy versus democracy. It was like this house would prefer technocracy to democracy. And the principle that is obviously coming, that is most likely going to come from how do you say, from op, is the principle that you have the right to vote, like the state has obligation towards you. Obviously, you're going to hear that. And here's the reason, and here's what state like recourse to the state needs to happen to some extent. What needs to be done, and the level of connection where people usually left this off, which doesn't mean that the principle is not standing at all, is that usually people leave it that state has obligation towards you. Here a reason why state has obligation towards you. But there is a special line of connection between A and B, which is why the state have a specifically this obligation towards you rather than anything else, right? Why is the thing that fulfills this obligation actually circling every 4 years person and candidate that you want to vote for? And this is what opposition, what government is definitely going to attack. When we were in this debate, Janko, as a government whip, spent 3 minutes just trying to break this link and saying, look, they have proven to you that we have some obligation towards people, and we agree. They haven't proven a link of why that obligation specifically needs to be circling a person once every 4 years. And it's very useful that we called it, instead of democracy, we tried to, and remember that that's also appealing to judges. I'm not calling it democracy. I'm calling it you're circling a number on the paper every 4 years, which has very little impact on what is going to happen. Obviously, we will have bickering about it, but what he needs to do And what their burden then becomes, and what the burden of the principle is, to prove why specifically this act is the thing that we owe, rather than, for example, what we said technocracy will provide. Yes, we as a state are giving you all of these, are owing you all of these things, but the state will provide you by having better policies and better quality of living overall that you will have under the rule of technocracy in this situation. So that was our way of answering it. And the only way for them to defeat it, and the only way for them to actually make the connection, is to make the connection why specifically this is the crucial and important connecting dot. I'm going to give you a couple of examples now, because I think that's the best way to illustrate some of the connections and some of the stuff. All coming from personal experience and in running principal cases. But as I said, like, principal cases has become, like, I was dreading principal cases. Or like there was a year I was buying books about reading about philosophy, but then I realized that it's not about reading about philosophy. It's about getting couple of simple concepts. And I told you 4 concepts. These 4 concepts are the likeliest ones that you are going to use in almost any, how do you say, debate. And learning how to do them properly is most likely going to net you win. Obviously, if you can think of more, great, be unique, create your own. But usually this is a very good starting point. It will cover, let's say 80% of the debates that you have to deal principles with will start from somewhere around these 4, and then developing it and connecting the dot from A to B. So what is the... give me 1 second to drink some water. I've been talking 6 hours today, or no, even more. I've been talking 8 hours today. Fuck. But anyway, let us continue. So I'm gonna give you examples from this year's Worlds. Yeah, I had lectures. For Sufi, Shanghai School for Economics and Finance from 8 a.m. So long talking and just talking. But anyway, the sixth round of WDC Thailand was we should introduce social credit system in Western liberal democracies. And just a reminder to everybody, I'm not going to go into how does it work. There is a huge info slide, but the gist of it is basically it will, how do you say, some socially acceptable and socially beneficial things will be rewarded by the credit, and some negative things will be punished by the credit, which then the credit will mean the social credit that you have score will influence stuff like, are you able to get a government job? Are you able to go up in the queue? How quality of the government services that you get? So a couple of things to caveat before I go into which we obviously mitigated. We won that debate from opening government just by pure principles. It was a very risky case because we purely did principle in this sort of debate. Is obviously we had some mitigations, which is to say, look, this is first of all, social credit system it's the Western version, right? It's not what's happening in China. It's first of all probably going to be democratically voted on, in this sort of situation, and we are going to have some vote on what do we commonly agree, and it's probably going to have to be to some extent bipartisan. Some things that are common grounds on people, for example, loitering, throwing trash on the streets, not donating to charity, not helping the poor, not doing stuff that is socially productive in this sort of situation. That's one. The second caveat was that harms and benefits are not that huge, right? It's just what the info slide said is the ability to get a government job. Nobody is owed the government job for anything like that. That's one. But that might be the most significant one. But the other one was how high in the queue you will be in government services. I mean, sure, you will wait more if you had this social credit. Or how was the quality of government services. Sure, you will have less quality of government services, but this doesn't mean that you will have no government services. You will still have healthcare. You might want to wait a bit more for it. So it's not dramatic. That's important caveat before I go into the principles, because then the principles will make more sense. So firstly, we picked out of the 4, we picked the principle of reparations. And it might sound crazy, why reparations? How are you connecting reparations with social credit system? But this is how you do it. So social credit system, so every action, so this is how I started. Every action that we are doing in a society has some cost, right? The fact that for example, the fact that I throw a trash on the street has a cost on another human being having to pick it up. Has a cost on like person who is cleaning the city to having to pick it up. Me not donating to charity has a cost that somebody else needs to pick up that cost, either a government or another very charitable individual. Similar to any other societal interactions, like every interaction has some cost, and it's not monetary. It's not always monetary, but it can be like made in monetary terms. Like you can translate for how much would you be willing to pick up this trash for me, and I would be throwing trash around the city in this sort of situation. So that's one. That's important. So every action has a cost, and everybody has to bear that cost. In the status and like people who are willing, like currently, people who are willing to bear that cost are receiving almost no compensation for having to pick up more slack than they actually do. So people who are more charitable, doing more to help out the community, doing all of these stuff are, picking up the slack of the community. Picking up the slack of the community in this sort of situation. The fact that you are doing some harm on the community is okay, and we think it's fine, but we also think it's completely fine for us to take some of your privilege because of it, and we're forcing you to pay by something by doing this action, and to transfer that payment and something that you have given up to people who are willing to do more for the community in this situation, who have now more, as a form of reparation towards them sacrificing and them, bearing your cost, because it's unfair for other people to bear the cost that you're imposing onto a society. So it's only fair for us to take something away from you and stuff, especially because it's not dramatic. So that's how I connected it. We had one more thing. This is very cool and this can also be used, which is to say, why do you have moral obligation towards the community at all? Because that can also be a clash in this sort of situation. The reasoning that we give is that the reason why you are alive and the reason why you can operate under a society is because everybody's doing their part. You cannot live without a person who's building a building. You cannot live without a person who's picking up trash. Like, you are dependent on, everybody in your society creating where you're living now. Like everything that you're doing is dependent on somebody, helping you out, somebody working, somebody willing to dedicate their time in this sort of situation. Alone, you would probably have to fight for survival. It'll be super hard. You might die. So you owe your life to some extent to that community, which doesn't mean that the community completely owes you. And that's the caveat, right? We're not saying that community now can do whatever the fuck they want with you. It just means that you have some obligation towards the community, and that obligation is at least when you're committing harm towards that community, that you pay some price for that harm. And similar principle, by the way, and now I'm going to give you one thing that additionally that we did, which will lead me to another point about analogies. Analogously, that's how prison system and that's how criminal justice systems work, right, in this sort of situation. So if the opposition were to oppose this principle, they would also, to be morally consistent, have to oppose criminal justice, because criminal justice is based on the situation where you do a harm onto a society, so we punish you for that crime. And even worse, that system is even more hardcore than just not standing in line. So insofar that you accept this hardcore system of criminal justice, where you can go to jail, and in some situations you don't have to accept the capital punishment, of course, but like for some things you go to jail for doing this, then this is definitely a lesser burden for us to prove in this sort of situation. So that is pretty much our full case. Obviously, we had more rebuttal and we had stuff, but this is how we connected a thing to a specific thing, and why social credit is specifically good at providing us this reparation and providing us this, this good, good thing that we're giving. And we, in the end, gave the analogy that, first of all, made our argument sound more persuasive, because, as I said, we just showed that what we said about the principle is already applicable somewhere else, and that if they want to oppose us doing this minor thing, then they definitely need to oppose also criminal justice system, or they need to somehow break the link between these two. So we, again, with this analogy, we put them into unfavorable position, because they either have to respond to it, and they need to take a long time to respond to it, which means that we're taking away from their speeches, taking away from delivering their positive material, or on the flip side, we have won, because their burden is now super huge to defend also abolishing the criminal justice system, or significantly making it different to fit their own principles in this sort of situation. I think that case is I very much like what we did in the case, and I hope it's clear and it illustrates the way to connect A and B. And the way to connect A and B is specifically important in terms of that we, in the end, connected it to a specific policy which is happening. Without it, our in principle might have been incomplete and hence more susceptible for people breaking it. The second way, and this is about the mechanisms, and this is how logical steps work. But the second way of proving, how do you say, an argument and amplifying, it's not necessarily a substitute for mechanism. You still need to have mechanisms, is this analogous approach. So analogies are same as examples are doing in regular arguments. Analogies are doing that in principal argumentation. Analogies can also work in practical argumentation for sure, but analogies have a special place in principal argumentation. You should always think of what is analogous situation in the status quo, because it is operating on two levels of two good stuff it is doing. One, it is shifting the moral intuition of a judge. You are always trying to pick some analogy that is more going to be appealing to a judge than what you initially are intended to defend in this sort of situation, right? So, for example, let's say, and this is a famous thing, and this is how you burst the logic to some extent as well. So there is a debate about it is immoral to not donate all of the money beyond your basic necessity, beyond basically keeping you alive, shelter, food, home, maybe some other stuff, but it doesn't matter. So that is the debate. I think it was the debate. I think it's a very was it in round robin, really? I don't know. I know it was in European round robin where I debated this pretty much. But here is an analogy. Here is a super good illustration of how initially judges think. Initially, judges really, their picture when they hear a motion is, look at this Bill Gates, no, not even Bill Gates, let's think of somebody who's really an asshole that is rich or something like this, some asshole. This is their picture, and they have in their mind their 3 houses that they're now living in. And if until the end of the debate, that's the picture that they're having, you as an op can just give up and you will not win the debate, because their intuition is going to be, of course, just take, it's immoral to live like this. The problem is you need to shift the burden and shift the moral intuition towards something more close to reality. Obviously, this debate also has this in mind, but this debate doesn't just affect, debate is not situated like millionaires, billionaires living beyond their basic needs are immoral. No, this is everybody. Even the person who is a middle class, even a person who is a bit poor but a bit richer. These are all of the people who did that. So here is the analogy that was used. This is a framing, but here is an analogy. So usually when it comes to money, people tend to be iffy because as I said, you're defending money. And in this situation, government side is going to try to push you and say this money translates into literal people's lives being saved and people living in horrible conditions and it's being unequal and stuff like that. You cannot compete with this. Money just seems less important. But this is the reason why you should use more dramatic things, right? You have currently two functioning, if you have, obviously, two functioning kidneys. If we removed one of them, almost certainly you would save another life and you would be continuing living fine. The only difference is your quality of life will be diminished, but everything else is fine. Everything else will be, you will not be able to play football. You will not be able to play some sports, to run, but you will be most likely fine. This is similar what it is living just on basic needs and like giving away full money. Of course, to some extent, how do you say, of course you can do it, similar as you can live with one kidney, but is it something that is morally required of you? Do we require you morally to save people's lives by giving away your kidney or giving away your blood or giving away any of these things? This means you're not winning with this, obviously. I'm not like, haha, now I won. No, but this is shifting the moral discourse towards a moral dilemma which is more connected to something that you want to say. And this is obviously you have to then analyze your own point. But this is the purpose, right? This is, you're trying to make it more, how do you say, look better on your side, the principle that you're giving, and shift away from moral intuition that says, look at this rich bastard and what they're doing in this sort of situation. And this is a fundamental debate about, do people have the obligation to help people who are worse off than them just because, how do you say, just because of that they're worse off than them in this sort of situation. The principle that flows from it is, for example, in this situation, out of the four will most likely be on the principle of choice, on the principle of consent in this sort of situation. You didn't choose any of the circumstances that you're born with. You didn't choose where you're going to be born with, how rich are you going to be born with, what are your desires, what do you like, what do you not like, which is fine. And there is also a crucial distinction, by the way, which is a bit of a digression, but it's important. Usually these motions have and people try to position a false dilemma there. It's not your burden on opposition in this debate to prove that it's completely how do you say, moral to hold all of these wealth, that the best thing to do is to hold all of these wealth. Basically, you can still say, we would say, because motion is phrased like it is immoral to hold all of these wealth. You can say, and very much like Goran, we would say it is morally commendable, morally amazing and great if you were to donate the money. Like, we would applaud and we think this is a moral action. We don't dispute that. We just don't think that it's immoral when you choose not to do this for these reasons. So this is also a level of separation from this. So you're not saying that everybody should live and do all of these things, but it's just like, if you choose not to behave in a certain way, you have the complete right to live in a certain way because of some reasons. And obviously, as I said, like, these reasons can be different. In this debate, we also had some interesting point trying to make it dramatic. If I have time in the end, I can explain. I can tell you what we done. I'm pretty proud of it. To be honest. I think that was my first 87 or 88 speaks that I got. But that's the purpose. Let's give you some other, but as I said, like, the main core of what I was trying to tell you is analogies are the ones that are shifting your moral discourse, and they're shifting, especially if you have iffy things that you need to defend, and if you have some things that sound unimportant. For example, I think sorry, I'm not going to give this example because it's a bit too complex for me now to explain. But let's give some other examples. So, for example, in a debate about right to euthanasia. So, for example, let's say you have euthanasia is like basically assisted suicide and helping people like who are going through pain in this sort of situation. Very good analogy that is proving completely your logic in there is like, currently we allow patients to refuse therapy. So if, for example, a cancer patient doesn't want to go to chemotherapy, we say this is fine. We're not forcing them. We are not forcing patients to undergo surgery. We have this principle of if you want to refuse help, you can, because it's your body. It's your body. You have complete autonomy over it. That's bodily autonomy. That's also one of the good principles. Good principles that you can derive from. Maybe a sixth one, but it's not bringing up that much in the last year. So that's a good principle is like de facto. If you allow people to opt, like if they have terminal illness, which is in both situations, and you allow them to not undergo surgery, in both cases you're basically allowing them to die, in both sides. Because like if you think that life is sacred and that we should protect life and that like nobody has the right to remove life, then you also should be standing for forcing them to go life-saving treatment that you think will help them, right? But we're not doing this. So this means, and again, remember, similar to what I did this, so you're basically allowing people to undergo super painful and horrible situation, because like if you don't undergo some of these procedures, you might die in much more pain. We're allowing them to do this, but we're not allowing them to have, like when they want to have assisted suicide, this is crazy. And this is, again, shifting the moral framework and shifting the moral intuition of a judge from being like, yeah, right to life or something like this, or like, yeah, we should protect all life, sacred life or something like this, towards something that is geared towards your side, which is very important and crucial in this sort of situation. Let me give you one more example. I think it was, yeah, I'm trying to remember how the motion was phrased. I don't remember. Like, sorry, my thought went away from my head. So during prep and during thinking of your principal cases, it's usually, and as I said, like, I had to actively make myself think of these things. Like, it's not something that naturally comes to the brain, like, oh, let me think of the similar thing that is happening. But like, I started to actively try and think of it and actively try to do it in prep. And it's very important because, as I said, like, this is something that can make some trivial things sound super important in this sort of situation, right? This can make, how do you say, like a trivial, unimportant, like the best example for this, actually, like in the use of analogies. I think he even uses like Gaza Strip to connect it, but it's like, it's a good emphasis. I think it's a quarterfinal. It's WDC. I'm gonna type it in the chat. Like, I'm not gonna type it in the chat. I'm just gonna find you the debate. Why would I even? It will take me 1 second. Sorry, there's WDC 2010 quarter. Let's talk about this. There it is. There it is. You don't have to watch any of the speeches except for leader of the opposition, and he creates it. He creates, how do you say? He makes this sound much more dramatic than it is. How do you say? Than it is. Like, he's saying, like, communities and countries and governments do not own people. Like, you are not owing stuff to your community. So, for example, the analogy that he uses, that I tend to use from time to time, and that I don't use Gaza Strip that much. I think I depersonalize it, which is basically like, if you were like, if the betterment of the community was your main principle and what should be best for these types of things, if you were to lock every refugee from leaving Syria, they might be better at fighting Assad, for example. But we think that's immoral. We think that people have the right to how do you say, like, not suffer the consequences, not suffer the harms, and disconnect themselves from the groups that they're trying. And usually that's why, like, they're trying to say, like, you owe something towards the group that you're coming from. And this is, I think, the debate that commonly uses this, which I don't think it's very good, which is like, LGBT. So it is. This house would closet reveal closeted LGBT sports people and stuff like that. So I think if you can prove from a principle, like, there is no gov, because like government is definitely going to be talking about there is benefits for the LGBT movement, But like that's what you're saying. Like communities, like even though you are the one, even though you are part of this community, you do not owe this community to be sacrificed for their own well-being, right? Like if, like especially if you are the one who is disenfranchised, if you are the one who is discriminated against, if you are fearing coming out in this sort of situation, it's completely, how do you say, immoral for government to run the case, which is to say, yeah, let's sacrifice this person for the betterment of the whole community. We don't believe that people should be forced to sacrifice themselves for this, for the greater good in this situation. And again, the analogy might be this, how do you say, like there are situations upon which you would definitely help your community by staying in your community. As I said, like staying in a dictatorship, staying in a war zone, maybe even, how do you say, fighting against a dictatorship or something like that. All of this can sometimes help your community. But do you have moral obligation to endanger yourself? No. Communities, like there's balance of on which we don't expect people to give their lives for this, and we think that's immoral. But like as I said, like some of these things that might sound at the beginning as issues that are more, how do you say, light, can become more hardcore based on this. I think I used this, and the example that I used this was this house. The motion was this house would allow give money to people, like financially subsidize people who want to move away from their state. So if somebody wants to move away, so if somebody wants to leave the state, states should support them in leaving, like giving them papers, assisting them in finding this in this sort of situation. And this sounds a bit op-heavy, right? Like on the basis, like the only thing that you can run from Gov is principle. Like if you want to win, like and I think we managed to win in the end. But the way to create this, like it sounds trivial, right? Like why should the government be paying for this in this sort of situation? But if you make it more dramatic, and if you talk about stuff like I said, like your state and your government is your prison. Those are the people who have complete, like the fact that you can walk outside still doesn't mean that you're completely free from the shackles of the state in this situation, because state can always do stuff to you. You can, if the state wants, they can prohibit you from leaving that state in this sort of situation, and it doesn't matter. And we believe that, like, because you cannot opt out of this, we owe you the ability. And the second part of the analysis is you never chose to be affiliated with that state. You never chose to be affiliated with certain ethnicity and this sort of situation. You were thrown into this world. Remember, this is the principle that we talked about, one of the four. They're repeating because that's how it goes. You didn't choose to have any connections with this. You were thrown into this world with certain genetics, with certain, how do you say, circumstances. We should at least, and that's sometimes these principles, least the thing that we can do, and because the state is limiting you in a certain way, at least let you choose your prison, basically. Like you cannot escape from any state, but we're at least letting you choose who is going to be you're imprisoning you to some extent, who is going to be dictating some of these things. And it will be immoral for the state to hold these people hostage just for the arbitrary factor of you randomly being thrown from your mother into this world, into this state that you might not have any affiliation for, that might be completely arbitrary in the way that you're connected, that might not share your values in this sort of situation. So this then becomes much more powerful, and it's much more able to, how do you say, deal with arguments like brain drain, like a lot of people will leave this country in ruin in this sort of situation, and why you shouldn't do it. Like if without this, you can't really operate and can't really do anything. So that's why some of these motions, the best and the absolute best strategy is to make it more dramatic. Like it sounds at the beginning as it's like paying people to leave the state. What the fuck? Who cares in this situation? But if you make it about like this being practically not letting you breathe, not letting you being locked up, like this is like the analogy is being locked up in a prison. That's, how do you say, that's something that can help you, how do you say, turn this moral intuition of a judge around, and then they vote for you. Especially in the framework, as I said, that judges in the majority of cases have the default cases that this is all bullshit. Let's utility, who gives me more dead bodies or not dead bodies, or helping or not helping, right? That's how simplistic sometimes people judge. So just like you have a higher burden, so that's why you need to make it stick and make it clear to a judge that you're gonna do it. Actually, this I can now tell you about the case about the how do you say about the the wealth, the thing like not donating wealth beyond all how do you say beyond your basic necessities is immoral in this sort of situation. How did I want to connect it and to make it super dramatic? Because again, remember, I had in my mind, judges will definitely sympathize more with poor people. Like I will have in judge's mind, he will be thinking about spoiled brat child of a rich person who is driving 3 Lamborghinis. Horrible. I don't want that. Like I will lose if this is left. So I want to connect it with something else. The way that we did it is firstly to ask the government, like what is the limitation of their how do you say of their principle. I think they even conceded to some extent that they would be fine with organs and stuff like that as long as you are not killing, as long as you're not dying for this. Like I think their line from the opening government was how do you say, as long as you're not dying, we are fine. We think you should sacrifice for the betterment of the others. So I wanted to play ball in this, and this is usually, if you want to win in some of these situations, usually playing ball with their metric is sometimes very powerful, right? And like being like, yeah, let's play ball. Let's try and prove why this is similar, why this is the same thing. So the way that we try to prove it is, again, obviously, remember, the beginning is usually almost always the same, which is like, look, your lottery of birth means that you haven't chosen where you're born, what your characteristics are, who you are, and what you are. And also, you're also not really, your choices are not really your own. And that's another thing that you can sometimes plug in the debate. Just like in principle debates, like the ability to choose is not really free in a lot of the circumstances, which means, how do you say, the ability to choose is limited. Usually you say 3 things. Again, this is a mantra that I now know, like that you can reuse, which is basically you're limited by your genetics and what your genetics are telling you. You're limited by your society and people who you grew up with, because like that influences what opinions you will have, like what religion you will be, like in this situation. You're also influenced by socioeconomic status that you're living, and also the country that you're born into. All of these things you had no influence over, but all of these things have shaped who you are as a person, and you didn't really have much say in this, which you don't really have to go as far as some of the debaters go. It's like there is no free will. Like obviously that would be harder to prove, but you can say that the free will is significantly diminished in this sort of situation. So that is a very, very powerful thing. But then how you connect it is pretty much. Sorry, I'm taking another sip of water. It's really, my throat is not good. So where did I stand? Yeah. So you haven't chosen any of this. What makes you who you are as a person is your desires to some extent. Like your love of debating means that you're spending Saturday afternoon listening to a lecture rather than going out and doing other stuff. Similarly, like other people like maybe love sailing, so they're dedicating their life sailing. And basically, these desires are not something that you're really controlling by yourself. It's not really your choice. It's also influenced by all of the factors that I said previously in this search. Okay. If you were to kill these desires, this will probably mean that you're not the person who you are, right? So I define myself like things that I do and things that I want are defining me as a person. So for example, as I said, like I am Milos, I dedicated my life to debating. I love debating. I love to do the world in which it would be immoral for me to hold any additional wealth beyond basic necessities would mean that Milos could not exist. that Milos's desires could never be fulfilled, which metaphorically, not physically, but metaphorically kills the person that is Milos. It kills, it kills me as an individual, because like if I cannot fulfill my desires, however ludicrous they be, and you can take a higher burden, like some of these people might have stupid desires or something like this, but the fact that they're not guilty for having these desires, and that these desires are, something like this, means that if this is a moral principle, that means that the only way for me to be moral is to metaphorically kill Milos and not be Milos anymore and give up all of these things. So, and I have some other things obviously, but that's, by the way, that's the way to dramatize the situation to something that is greater than, yes, hold more money than basic necessities, which sounds very trivial, which sounds very, who the fuck cares, right? This is now become a philosophical, existential question about like your right to self-actualization and your life to be who you are or something like this. So that's how you approach it. That's how you do it. And like there is no theoretical way for me to explain it other than giving you examples about it, and that's the problem. But like I'm hoping that you're getting my logic and that I'm coming off clear in some of these things. If I'm not clear, just yeah, I'm sorry. Just types and let me clarify something. Another thing, but as I said, this not choosing and as I said, like choice that is not just like beginning of life, like lottery of birth, and usually tackling about choice usually has to play a part in other areas. For example, like criminal justice debates usually have principles that are going to be tied to a lot of people who are, for example, a very popular debate that is set from time to time is we should never use retribution in criminal sentencing. So only talk about rehabilitation in this sort of situation. And usually people struggle for some reason from government. I think government is super easy. Basically what you want to do is, first of all, prove why most of the things that people are doing is not their fault. Like as I said, like you are the product, your actions is the product of the society that you live in, of how do you say, like as I said, like poverty, socioeconomic status, political situations in this sort of situation. Which doesn't mean, and by the way, you don't have to be explicit. You don't have to say you bear no responsibility. But it is an extenuating circumstance. You cannot say that somebody who had like abusive parents and was horrible towards, like was beaten as a child, is as responsible as somebody who had everything perfect, and that like there is a level of responsibility. The problem is, and how you approach this is, in majority of situations, like retribution is basically there to punish you on top of what's necessary in this sort of situation. But what you're saying is basically we should be punishing you for some of just to reiterate, this doesn't mean that if we don't use retribution, we don't have to do other stuff like rehabilitation, incapacitation, all of the stuff. We have the right, even if you're not guilty, to prevent you from harming others, because there's some other important things. But hurting you beyond what's necessary, which this is what's necessary, is immoral. And one more reason is because we are all guilty for your crime. It's not that you are guilty for your crime. We are all playing part in this. The fact that some communities are poorer means that they are more likely, like poverty is most highest indication of a crime. It's not like lack of the moral character. It's the fact that you have no other choice. Like it's not connected to any characteristic. Like during the 90s in Serbia, when we were under sanctions, you had so much crime. But why did you have it? You had this crime. sorry. Had this crime because people had no other choice. And whose fault is that? It's the fault of every one of us who are not in these situations, for not paying more attention to these people, for not giving them more money, not giving them more support. So basically, we all played a part in this, and now we're punishing you beyond like what is necessary to actually make you feel better and to repair some of these situations. Again, this is not a burden to show, as I said, that we should not do anything to you, that you are an amazing person. It's just to say that we should never punish people beyond what we are also guilty as to some extent. This is not just in terms of poverty, right? Like if your father or if you had a case of domestic violence in a house, and then like because of the trauma and mental health issue, you become like a serial killer, or you become somebody who commits crime. This is again failure of society. We didn't have proper mechanisms to deal with domestic violence. We have like sexism in society. We have toxic masculinity, which is promoting some of these behavior in this situation. So we are guilty for not saving you from these situations. And now that you glad on a path of astray, we are like disgusted by you. We don't want to look at you. We put you in prisons in this situation. That's also all of these can also talk about why we owe some obligation towards the prisoners in this sort of situation. But as I said, like you're trying to make it dramatic. You're trying to make the judge also feel guilty about some of these people. The fact that you're living in a better house means that somebody else doesn't have your wealth that you're having, which means that they are more likely to spiral into crime. Like you can also tie it to the principle. If you want to do even more analysis, you can even tie it to the thing that I told about the roles, right? Like you wouldn't want to be the person who would be trapped in poverty and forced to do crimes in this situation if you were depersonalized. You're accepting this system on the premises that it's not affecting you, and that is a horrible way to live your life, and it's immoral, and that's why, dear judge, you should vote opening government rather than opening opposition. So that's how you are presenting it. And obviously, as I said, it's not just about the drama. Drama still needs to be dramatic, like in raising of the stakes, still needs to be followed with proper analysis. So you can notice that every time that I said something like this, I still had huge tying in with, as I said, like some of these mechanisms that I told you at the beginning, or some of these analogies that are gonna do so. So like, don't fall into a pitfall of just being dramatic. You still need to like prove and do all of these things, but like as I said, like don't let judges' preconceived notion about what and how this debate plays out influence how they're going to judge. And it's definitely going to influence how they're going to judge. What they think first is going to, like, let me give you a non-principle principle debate example that usually, like it's not obvious, right? If you say, if there is a debate about, introducing a minimum wage or something like this, or like introducing a very high minimum wage, first thing that comes to judge's mind when you get this motion is like McDonald's workers or Amazon workers or some of these huge large corporations, greedy corporations, Jeff Bezos, look at, he has millions, but he's not giving it to his workers, and stuff like that, right? This is the first thing the judge has to mind, and while he's judging, he's only thinking about Jeff Bezos and his sort of situation, and also, government is trying to present Jeff Bezos as the culprit. The problem is, this debate is not just about Jeff Bezos. This debate is about every small business that is operating, small to medium enterprises. Jeff Bezos, if he has to increase minimum wage, will be fine because he still has millions. Some of the businesses will close because of it. And that's what you need to, like if you want to win this debate, because like it sounds very humane, you need to give the workers more money, of course, in this sort of situation. But if you want to combat something that sounds uncomfortable, which is like economic, maybe defending an economically right position in this sort of situation, by making it, shifting judges' opinion of how this looks like is crucially important in achieving this. And as I said, like not thinking about Jeff Bezos, but also thinking of, this is not harming Jeff Bezos, this is harming a small business entrepreneur who is not really that rich, who is not really abusing their workers, but does not have money to pay for that minimum wage or something. So that's how. By the way, I'm not saying I'm not taking moral stances on minimum wage. I'm just giving you an example of if you're giving this position to defend what and how you should approach that in this sort of situation. That's similar with whenever you're trying to defend money in some sort of situation as moral or as individualistic or sometimes even greed to some extent. Usually, if you leave it at money, you will have troubles. But like if you transition into analogies about other bodily autonomy, which is to say, as I said, like blood, organs, or some of these things. Or even worse, transition into translating what money means. Like money symbolizes your time spent. You spend some time to do something, and it symbolizes that work. It also symbolizes all of the physical and health deterioration that you required. So if you work in a factory and you get a paycheck, that money is the symbol of every sweat that you had, every health decline that you had, everything that you sacrificed to get this money. This is what this money symbolizes. It's not just money. It's basically, to some extent, like it sounds pathetic, but it's like part of you. It's part of, like, it's basically somebody taking that away from you is basically taking your, like, sweat, taking your blood, sweat, and tears, and like forcing you to work for free. And that's how you can talk about why taxation is immoral. If you need to talk about taxation being immoral, but like it's important if you talk about these sort of topics to not leave it at the most common thing that people will think about this, especially if they're, as I said, remember what I said, people are coming from different backgrounds, different people have different preconceived notions and opinions on different moralities, different things in this situation. So it's very good for you to bridge that gap by using something that is going to connect them to that thing in the first place. Okay, so we are nearing the end of the debate. I can, like, if somebody has questions, now would be the time to ask them. If not, I will just go into like key takeaways from this lesson, and then I will finally close my 8-hour of speaking day today. So as I said, if you have some questions, feel free to ask. I hope this was clear. I hope this was useful. I hope this was useful for you. Like, I try to make it, as I said, I try to make it as no bullshit as possible. Like that's what I hate about moral philosophy workshops that people did for me, which is saying like, I'm talking about Kant, I'm talking about this. Fuck this. Just use this simple logic to win debates and have fun with it. And that's when you leave this burden of having to sound super smart, read all of these books, think of these principles. This is when these debates become actually the thing that I'm looking forward to. And I'm like, how can I figure out the most fun analogy that I can use and something that I can reuse, that I can tell to my friends? And that's how you should approach principle argumentation. If principle argumentation is devoid of this boring aspect of old white men philosophers talking about bullshit, and just start talking from either your own experiences or some of these mechanisms that I told you are pretty formulaic. They're universal to some extent, and they're universally going to be accepted if you can analyze them. And I hope you paid attention to that part of the lecture. I think that can really help you come on top of these, and following this, like on all of these things that I'm telling you from my own example, because like I managed to win this debates like this. Like I think that's. I mean, we were not good. We were not good in the Open semifinals of Thailand, but it got us there. We were better than we would if I didn't apply these things. We were fine. We were okay in the Open semifinals. But for example, that's the classic way where you would use your principal case in this sort of situation. So key takeaways: 1, you debaters, even though it's wrong way to judge the debate, usually default to utilitarianism as being the metric. Because that is the case, when you're running a principal case, you will have additional job to present that, how do you say, moral framework shouldn't be utilitarian. The way to do it is, the most easy way to do it is to just break the illusion of in front of a judge that in the status quo in real life, utilitarianism is what dominates us. Because it's not. Because in the status quo, we have so many different instances and so many different situations where we are using other stuff than utilitarianism in criminal justice, in prohibiting torture, in prohibiting inhumane behavior towards people in this sort of situation. So that's like this is you can use this so many times. Like, it's easy. You think of the 3 examples that fit for you the best. I usually use incarcerating people prematurely because this usually what people never tends to agree. Like I say, there are people, if you know that there are people who are at risk of committing crime, we do not imprison them just because we believe there is a risk, because we believe that's immoral. It's very unlikely that somebody's going to, from the opposition, come and say, no, let's imprison them, like Minority Report movie or something like this. So I pick some of these things that are less likely to come on the opposition from the other side. So just pick 2 or 3 examples, and you can reuse them from the debate to be like, look, here is why utilitarian framework is not the main framework, and this is not the end. You still need to give me why this falls under the non-consequentialist framework, because this is proving how do you say, you still need to prove that non-consequentialism should be the thing. This is more of a negative thing. This is more used there because it's so hard for some judges to grasp that it's incorrect to judge. By the way, today I think they already released my lecture. We released module 2 on Korea WEC judge training. I would implore you to go, like I'm plugging it right now, but like I would implore you to go and look at it, because it deals with comparisons overall. In my video specifically, there is some of the things that I told you here, but some of the more judging aspect of it, of like comparing principle and practical argumentation. But like, as I said, like I emphasized several times there, which is there is no default way of judging the debate. The correct way of judging the debate as being an average reasonable person is to be open to be persuaded by both sides. But you still, as I said, you will encounter bad judges. Don't dwell on this. You will encounter them throughout your whole life. Just think of it as a challenge, as an additional challenge, as like a hard mode in a video game in a certain situation. Hard modes in video games, like bosses have more health. It's harder for you, but like consider this a challenge, not something that is going to bring you down in this sort of situation. And lastly, 2 other key takeaways. And by the way, and 2 other key takeaways is use the mechanisms that I provided to you. I provided to you, I think, 4 or 5, 6 if you count the choice and like freedom in this sort of situation. Develop them yourself. You all definitely have some unique ways that you're looking at things. I might look at them differently. You might look at them differently. But let that be your starting point to look and construct your principal cases. And it's not a shame, especially if you're an ESL speaker, to be honest, to have some of these prepared. To sit with your partner and says, let's generally talk about how we would prove this part of principal mechanisms, and then have it ready, not necessarily on paper, but at least have it ready in your head, so then when the debate comes, it's much easier for you. It's much easier for you to how do you say to. That's why I told you, for example, the government responsibility things, 3 things that you say, like you will every time, almost every debater will say all of these 3 things, like it's mandatory, but that's not a shame. It's completely fine for you to cut some corners, especially if you're ESL and if you're already struggling, and I know because that was my struggle. If you're already struggling in delivering all of the material that you want and people are speaking with beautiful accents, the best way to combat that is to have some of these things ready that then don't have to bother you, and that will be great. So that is 1. And 3, always think of analogies, and there is infinite amount of these analogies that you can do. Try to be creative and smart about it, and try to connect them to the actual thing. And I think that can very much help you amplify and decrease the stakes of the debate and make your principle sound more reasonable and better if you're doing it in that way. So that is all from me, unless you have some questions. Also, if you have some questions, you can ask me privately afterwards. You can find me on Facebook. Like, share, subscribe. No, I'm kidding. But like you can find me on other platforms. It is also fine. I'm also quite exhausted after the full day. So yeah. Thank you all for listening to me. I hope this is helpful. I hope you carry this with you, and I hope you find the best thing that I hope is that you rediscover how fun principled argumentations can be, because I think some teams just make it boring and just don't Don't listen to them. Just listen to an ESL person speaking to you from their own experience. So thank you for listening, and yeah, bye bye. I'm gonna turn off Discord now. Bye.